Okay guys, so let's talk about JavaScript function in this tutorial. So what is JavaScript function and what is the uses of JavaScript function? JavaScript function is similar to a procedure of a set of statements that performs a task or calculates a value, but for a procedure to qualify as a function, it should take some input and return an input where there is some obvious relationship between the input and the output. I got this online from mozilla.com. Okay, so but for my own view, it is used to organize code that will be executed many times, and for codes that will be executed when an event occurs. For codes that will be executed when an event occurs. So like codes that you know that you are going to be repeating this set of codes. You're going to be repeating them in the scripts, or you are going to be repeating them in the application they are building. So it is better to put them inside the function. That will make your code organized. It will make it an organized code. So it will make it an organized code. So, and for codes that you don't want the code to just execute just anytime, you want to execute maybe later maybe when the user click a button, or when after a set of time, maybe after 3 seconds or so. So that is what functions is used for. So until now we've been writing the JavaScript inside the script tag, but now let's use external JavaScript. Let's just create the JavaScript here. Let's name it index.js, and this src current directory index.js. Okay, now let's save it. Now we are going to be using this separate file, the index.js of this separate file. Okay, now how do we define the function? We can define the function in multiple ways, but in the old way, this is how to define the function. Then the name of the function, let's say you can say multiply, then a opening brackets and closing brackets, then a curly brace. This is the block. This indicates that any code that is inside the curly braces, they are a block of code for this function. So let's say console.log. Oh, sorry. Console.log hello world. Okay, save. And since we've included the JavaScript file in our HTML, so it should work now. Now let's go to the browser, let's reload it, and let's bring up our console, Ctrl+Shift+K on Windows, and let's reload it. Oops, nothing is happening. Why? Now there's another way to define a function. Now we are not going to call the function now. There's another way to define the function by calling the const add. So then the opening bracket. Okay, oops, I made a mistake. Const add, then equal to function, which is the anonymous function. So functions that does not have name, they are called anonymous function. This is called anonymous function because it does not have name, like name, test function, something like that. Because it does not have name, so it is called anonymous function. Okay, so you can console.log console.log 5, and the last way to define a function is by saying reduce. Let me just name this reduce, then equal to, then ES6 arrow function. This is a function. So if someone tells you to define an arrow function, this is how to define an arrow function. This is just how to define an arrow function. And there's anonymous arrow function too. So this is an example of anonymous arrow function. This is an anonymous arrow function. So the arrow functions are mostly anonymous. Okay, so we can log. I'm just going to log console.log log. Let's say okay. Let's just say 3. Let's save it and go to the browser and check if anything will happen. Okay, we are not seeing anything in the console. Why? Yeah, we need to call each of them for the function to execute. We have to call it. So this is how to call a function. We call it now. Let's call it without the brackets. Let's call it without the brackets. All right, nothing was done. Now let's add the brackets there. Save, and I can see it was executed. Now the next one, let's call add, and let's call reduce. Let's save it and let's go to the browser, and all right, everything was executed. Okay, now the next thing is function do more when you pass in values to them. When you pass in parameter, it's called parameter. When you pass in parameter, so the parameters are always here inside the brackets. So let's say number 1 that we want to multiply, then number 2 that we want to, the second number that we want to multiply, and that's, I'm just going to say console.log number 1 times number 2. Now let's test that in the browser. It's not a number. It's returning not a number. Why? Because we have to pass in values here. So let's say we want to multiply 3 and 2. So let's just save it and let's reload the page. I can see 6. Now the next one is add. We want to add a number. Now let's take parameter number 1 and number 2. Because this number 1 and this one, they are the same, does not mean that the both of them are the same, or does not mean that this one will take the value of this one. No, because they are in different function. Okay, now let's execute. Let's try that. num1 plus num2. Okay, so let's pass in number 10, 20. You should be expecting 30. Yeah, that's 30. Okay, so this 30. And reduce, we want to minus number. So let's pass in a parameter. The number 1, the first number that we want to pass in, and the second number that we want to pass in. So then we'll do that here. num1 minus num2. Then we'll take in an argument. Anything you pass in here is called an argument. 3 and 2 are arguments. So let's pass in an argument So the first number that we want to minus is 40. We want to take 25 from 40. Now let's check that out. That's 15. Okay, 15. Okay, now let's check the scope. The function scope. Any variable that is declared outside any function is declared in the global scope. Let's say function number 1. Okay, let's number 1 is not a function, so let's number 1 equal to 47, and let's number 2 equal to 29. Now if we now say const, now in this tutorial we are going to be defining functions with the anonymous function. So I'm going to say const check numbers equal to, then so I'm going to log console.log number 1 and number 2. Let's save it and let's check it out. Oops, we have to call it check number. I just save it and reload the page. Now 47 and 29. Okay, now let's check something. There's those ones are in the global scope. So this one is in the global scope, and let me define another variable here that is also number 1 and set it to 38, and another variable called number 2 and set it to 72. Now let's save it and check it out in the browser. It says 38 and 72. Why? Because these are in the local scope here and these are in the global scope. So if you name a variable that is the same with the variable in the global scope, it is going to the local scope is going to overwrite the global scope. So it's going to override the one in the global scope. So that is a JavaScript scope, and you cannot access any variable. Let me just try to define a variable. Var 2 number equal to 67. Okay, now let me try to access it outside here. Console.log. Let me try to access it. So I'm just going to say 2 number. So let's save it and let's check it out in the console. Reference error. 2 number is not defined. It means I cannot get the 2 number outside the function because it is in local scope. I cannot get it outside of the function. And there's another thing we need to look at is a function inside a function. So if I should define a function like function const const age equal to, it calculates age, calculates age, calculates age. So there can be another function inside the calculate age again. Let's just so we are going to be defining function calculates equal to, like I said before, we are going to be defining function with arrow function. Okay, const calc so is going to say, and I want to introduce us to this keyword return. So the return is going to return a value like this. Okay, now we want to calculate age, the oldest age, and okay, age difference. We are calculating age difference, and okay, old age, young age. Okay, so we are going to return old age minus young age. Now we are now going to return calc. So you can return anything. You can return the function. Since this function is returning something, is going to be returning a number. Now we are going to, if we are returning a function, we are returning what the function is returning. So that's what the function is evaluating. So you can say calculate age difference 56 and 39. Let's save it and check. Oops. Reload. Okay, now since we return it, we have to get the value, we have to set it into a variable age diff equal to this. So console.log age diff, and let's save that. Oh, I didn't save it. Okay, I can see 17. So that's 56 minus 39. So that's 17. And that's function in a function. And what of function that call itself? So let's try to do let's try to calculate factorial. Let's try to calculate the factorial. So I'm going to be using this to explain the function that returns itself, that is calling itself. So factorial. So let's say we are going to get a number, and now I'm going to introduce us to the if statement fully. Now if number is equal to 1, if number is equal to 1, or number is less than 1, just return, we are just going to return 1. Else return the function, return factorial num, okay, num minus 1, and I'm going to be multiplying the number. I'm going to be multiplying the number by factorial num minus 1. So what it's going to be doing is it's going to be multiplying factorial by the value that is returned from the current factorial. So it's going to be returning it. So it's going to multiplying itself. It's going to be calling itself, and until the value is 1. And if the value is 1, it's going to return 1. So it's going to multiply this number by 1, and it's going to stop there. It's going to end the execution there. So we can now test the factorial. Or we can log the factorial like that. Factorial, you can just call it like that. Factorial, look for the factorial of, let's start from 3. Okay, factorial of 3 is 6. Let me just indicate it so that we know that we are looking for factorial. Factorial is, so let's check for another factorial. Let's say 6 factorial. That should be, if I guess, should be 720. Okay, yeah, 720. Okay, so that's factorial. So that's how to get factorial. Okay, now let me talk about a very important stuff in JavaScript. That's this. JavaScript this. I mean this. This. So I'm going to be defining multiple functions now. Tests arrow function. So this is an arrow function. Anonymous arrow function. This is an arrow function. Let me just call it arrow function. Okay, and I'm going to be logging the value of this, and I'm going to define another function here. Let me just copy this and tests normal. I'm just going to call it normal function. So that is function that. So that's that. Okay, now let's go check them out, and we can just call them after this place here and call the second one. Okay, let's call the first one first. Okay, let's save it and let's go check it out. So this returns window, the window element. The first this returns the window element, and second this too returns the window element. Now let's test another thing. Let's say this dot name equals follows AB, and this dot name equals to follows. Let's say this dot name, this dot name. Now as you can see, the color of this one changes. So let's go check it out in the browser. Let's load it. I can see follows AB and follows AB. So, but okay, let me just do this. Let's say second name and test it, and I'm just going to log this one, second name, and okay, it still work. But what I want to test is I'm going to log this dot name. I'm going to log this dot name now. This dot name, and let me just copy it. This dot sec name, and check what the value is. I'm going to explain what the value is in a moment. Okay, follows and follows. Why? We were able to access these two variables. We were able to access it outside the function, Now let me define another function here. Function test third function. That's going to be then I can log console.log this dot third name. Okay, this dot third name. That's going to be AB follows. Let's save and let's call this function here. Now let's call it and let's load the page now. As you can see, AB polus, it was also executed. AB polus was also executed. Now let me remove this here and save it and check what's going to happen. It was still executed, and this third function. Okay, let's go to the page. Third function, AB polus. Now let me remove this from here and change it to second function. Let me save it, and second function, it was executed also. And let me remove this from the arrow function, which is the first function. Let me save it and let's load the page. It was also executed. Okay, now let's remove, let me come down here and remove this dot name here, this dot name, and remove this dot name here. And the last one, I'm just going to log, this is the short form to call the console.log. Okay, so they were all still executed. Why? Because all this stuff was defined in the window, because they said what we mean is we are defining window, we are saying window dot name, and we are setting it to a value, because defining a variable like this, it will make it a global scope. It will make it a global variable. So I hope you got this function. If you have any question, just leave it in the description of this tutorial.